Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. It's April 23rd, 2024. I'm glad to be here with you. You know, every week we get more little bombshells dropped in the UFO, UAP community. I am quite convinced that had these been dropped about a decade ago, the world would be running around right now pulling the hair out of its head because of all of these incredible statements and revelations. And yet here we are. You look around the world, we got talk of World War III coming from this direction, coming from that direction. And the UFO, UAP information just gets lost in the shuffle. No one's really discussing this, but it's amazing what really is happening in the field these days. So last night, there was a tweet that reposted some statements by Christopher Mellon. Chris Mellon, many people, of course, know a lot about Chris. He's former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence under the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations. He's been very much involved in the UFO community for getting information out to the New York Times and making a lot of statements over the years. I would say really promoting the need for transparency, if not disclosure, about this subject from the government to the public. I think he's made some very, very powerful statements over the years. So he just leaked something that I think is quite significant that was shared on Twitter. And it's on his Substack, which I've got linked below. I strongly recommend you go check out Chris Mellon's Substack. But what he did is he shared a private message between himself and an unnamed senior U.S. government official, which seemingly confirms a crash retrieval program of UFOs, UAP, and the recovery of one such craft in Kingman, Arizona in the 1950s. For those of you who have studied this subject for any amount of time, you may very well have heard of the Kingman crash of 1953, or at least we could say the Kingman recovery. Was it a crash or was it a landing? But from 1953. And so this is a statement that really strongly confirms it. And I think I'm just going to start by sharing the signal message that he shared. And by the way, Chris shared this. I think I don't know. I mean, we'll have to really get a detailed view of this, but on his Substack, he talked about just wanting to counter some narratives that have been put out by the U.S. government. And he got permission from the individual that he had this exchange. This is from Signal, from circa 2020, as he writes here in the corner. And in fact, went through the process of making sure that this was properly a non-classified or declassified message. He actually went through proper channels. The Signal correspondence itself is not classified, and so therefore he was within his rights to publish this. And again, he did get permission from this individual who is unnamed. And this is a conversation that apparently took place 4 years ago. So I'll just read it, and it goes back and forth. So this individual writes to Chris Mellon. He says, blanked and I are making huge progress getting into the CR, that is crash retrieval program. He plans to meet with you at some point. Chris writes back. He says, the blank would be slack-jawed if they find out what, oh, I'm sorry. That person continued to say the so-and-so would be slack-jawed to find out what we now know. Mellon's reply is fully redacted. And then this person writes again. Right now, we haven't gone that far back. So apparently the question had to do with maybe Roswell. Just guessing here. But the person says, we're dealing with the recovered UAP that landed in Kingman, Arizona in the 50s. Again, this is well known to UFO research and has been for many years. He goes on, he says, we're vacuuming up info as whoever blacked out gets read in. We now know the management structure and security control systems and ownership of the CR. We also know who recovers landed or crashed UAPs under what authorities. We also know that a still highly classified memo by a secretary of the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s is still in effect to maintain the cover on UAPs. And he goes on and says, we also know the SES-2, who's the Air Force gatekeeper. I'll discuss that in a moment. And then this is from a tweet, I think from UFO Secrecy on Twitter. This is quoting part of Mellon's Substack article. Again, you could read the whole thing below. And here he's really just giving his explanation as to why he released this and how he was able to release this conversation as he did. So it's all very, very, very interesting. And, I just want to say, a lot of these people who have been really coming out there, whether it's Chris Mellon or Lou Elizondo or David Grush or, whoever else, they often get a lot of flack from not just the mainstream media, but frequently from within the UFO community itself. We can discuss motivations as to why. I find some of these criticisms to be pretty threadbare, to be honest with you. For me, the thing that matters is, what are these people saying? Are they saying something that is true? Are we able to investigate this? How can we go deeper? And I think, so far they've got a pretty good track record. And I'm very supportive of these types of bits of information that do come out to us. So the conversation then that I just read here, this is all about details about making progress in accessing information relating to a UAP or UFO that landed in Kingman, Arizona in the 1950s. He talks about the program's management, or at least refers to its management, its security controls, the recovery process. All of this apparently is in place for landed or otherwise recovered UFOs, and apparently a highly classified 1950s memo by a secretary of the Air Force from the 50s that is still in effect to maintain secrecy on this subject. And by the way, I just checked into this. So the Secretary of the Air Force at that time, from 1953 to 1955, was this man here, Harold E. Talbot. I'm assuming he would have been the person who had issued this order. Possibly it was issued from his successor after 1955, but Talbot was the man on the job when the Kingman event occurred, which was in May of 1953. So he would have been on the spot at that time, and it's probably an assumption, reasonable assumption, that he would have been the guy to have issued the order, but that's all conjecture at this point. So again, I think, this is very, very interesting. And in his Substack, by the way, Mellon talked a bit more about this and just really highlighted, the government's denials of having any off-world technology. And he said, look, I'm just sharing this to illustrate why some of us might consider allegations otherwise to be worthy of investigation. Yeah, absolutely. We've been hearing for some time now that, very serious conversations on this have been taking place behind closed doors in and around Capitol Hill. And this is simply more confirmation of that. Mellon went on and just said, look, the government can deny whatever they want, but we know there've been over 1,000 military UAP reports that have been recorded in recent years. And he talked about drone overflights over U.S. bases and warships, obviously, which we've been hearing a lot about. And just stating his position that, what is needed is a serious congressional and executive branch attention to the UAP subject and everything that goes along with it. He did add that the individual in that exchange, the signal exchange from 2020, while believing in the existence of recovered materials, basically admitted to not having seen or touched a recovered craft and was denied further access to the program. So that's pretty interesting too. I looked up what SES was, because that person at SES was said to be like a gatekeeper essentially. And I didn't know what that was, but it turns out that it stands for a Senior Executive Service, SES. That's within the U.S. federal government. And it's a position classification that, at least from what I was reading, is very important to the functioning of the government as they've got it set up. I could not find a specific designation of SES2, but that just may be that I just didn't look hard enough. But as a whole, SES is said to serve as a bridge between the highest ranking appointed officials in the federal government and then the rest of the whole federal workforce. So they're supposed to be responsible for operating and overseeing nearly every or many different types of government activities in different agencies and departments. And it was supposedly established to ensure that the executive management of the government is responsive to the nation, that is the needs of the nation, policies, goals, and is accountable to the public. So if, presumably the individual at SES there who is the gatekeeper has decided, because this was 4 years ago, that the public does not have a need or should not know about this. I mean, that's what I would assume. These are pretty high-level people, and one of them is a gatekeeper, according to that exchange, of UAP information, either on Kingman or the subject as a whole. Very interesting. And by the way, so I'm recording this before I bring on my friend and colleague, Michael Schratt, to discuss some of this with us. But I'll just say before I bring Michael on that the 1953 Kingman, Arizona crash recovery is a very important one. This was actually known to researchers really before we even, researchers of the 70s investigated Roswell. So the Kingman crash, or the Kingman recovery, I keep saying recovery over crash because it's not clear to me that this was a crash, because from what we have learned, the craft was recovered essentially intact. But 1953 was a big year. I mean, you have a huge wave of UFO sightings in the United States in 1952. It's been discussed a lot. There was a huge wave of UFOs that took place around the world, particularly Europe, but also South America in 1954. 1953 was also a pretty big year of UFO sightings in the United States and elsewhere. It was not a quiet year. So there was a lot going on in the phenomenon at this particular time. And whereas we don't, you think of UFO crash, people think of Roswell. Not surprising. Roswell has, dozens of witnesses who've gone on the record to talk about this. Very few other crash retrieval events have anywhere near that amount in terms of witness testimony. But Kingman was actually investigated, or at least discussed, as early as 1973. Now, in the case of Roswell, of course, we had the newspaper account that came out in 1947, but Roswell was buried for another 30 years after that. It wasn't until the late 1970s that we were starting to learn really any kind of detail about Roswell. Kingman was discussed. Ray Fowler, the legendary UFO researcher, actually just discovered this case, investigated the case, and then it was written about by Leonard Stringfield in one of Stringfield's books from the late 70s called Situation Red. So this predates the public recognition of the Roswell incident by quite a few years. So in the Kingman crash, you have a description of basically a perfect kind of flying saucer, I think about 30 feet in diameter. We're going to talk with Michael about this. Michael Schratt is, in my opinion, the best living expert, at least in the public realm that I'm aware of, on the Kingman event. But it was made of a kind of a dull silver metal. The key witness initially went under the pseudonym of Fritz Werner, but his actual name was Arthur Stansel Jr., and he was an engineer on a U.S. Air Force contract with the Atomic Energy Commission, which is now the Department of Energy, for a project called Operation Upshot Knothole, a series of nuclear tests that were conducted at that time. And so Stansel stated that he had seen a crashed object and a dead alien, about 4 feet tall, in a kind of silvery metallic suit. And there have been other whistleblowers as well who have referred to Kingman. Probably the best known of those was Bill Uhouse, who also made statements about the Kingman crash and actually stated that this was being used in reverse engineering efforts. So we're going to talk with Michael about that, I have no doubt. So it's a very interesting statement that Chris Mellon has released. I really want to offer my support for that. And, is it true what, this other person was saying to him? Well, it seemed to have been said in confidence, one-on-one 4 years ago. I think presumably the other individual had no reason to pull a fast one on Chris Mellon or deceive him in any way. I'm sure that wasn't the case. Chris was able to get this person's permission to put the statement out there. So I think what you're looking at is, again, the continuation of a behind-the-scenes battle going on within the national security establishment. That is what it looks like to me. I've been saying for years now that we're looking at a factional struggle, a factional war within the national security apparatus over this whole matter of UAP, as it's now called. There are folks within that structure, today, just as 50 and 70 years ago, who promoted a policy of more disclosure on this subject to the public. This is not the first time that government insiders have had this opinion and have tried to do something to get this information out. I just think they're having more success today than was the case 50 or more years ago. But this is an old game. This is an old struggle. And on the other side, you have, let's call them the secrecy group. That was the name given to them by the UFO researcher, let's say insider, Donald Keyhoe, who wrote about this a lot in the 1950s. Keyhoe referred to the UFO secrecy group pretty regularly back in those days. I think that's a pretty appropriate name to this day, the secrecy group. And this is a significant struggle, I think, that is going on to this day. And, it really does look more and more that the house of cards may be starting to fall. Not something I would have predicted a couple of years ago, to be perfectly candid with you. I had always felt that any kind of genuine disclosure, transparency was probably years down the road, if at all. I'm still not really believing that we're going to be looking at a truly, fully honest disclosure if that were to happen at all. I think it's fair to say that we're looking at disclosure with a lot of spin that would be attached to it and probably a lot of missing pieces to the puzzle. But nonetheless, I'm just going to say, for the record, we've gone a lot farther along in release of information than I personally would have thought a couple of years ago. So it's very interesting. How this is going to play out, though, we are just all going to have to keep our eyes on this one and wait and see. So it's very, very interesting times that we're living in, that is for sure. So let me pause this video here, and I'm now going to bring on my friend and colleague, Michael Schratt, who's going to have a lot more to say about the release of this information, and particularly the Kingman UFO crash retrieval, which really remains and has always remained one of the really interesting and I would say quite significant crash retrievals in the whole history of this phenomenon. Because it seems that whatever was recovered at Kingman potentially has been studied for a long time. I mean, I even wondered, when the Davis Wilson notes leaked out in 2019, those notes discussed a virtually intact craft. And I wondered, is this the same craft? I mean, hard to say. Do we have a couple that are perfectly intact? Maybe that's the case, but maybe the Kingman craft is one of them. So just things to think about. But now, please let me bring on my friend Michael Schratt. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the program. Thanks for coming by to talk about this very interesting development relating to what Chris Mellon had to say, and some chat about the Kingman UFO crash itself. I just want to let you know, before you came on, I did a little bit of a chat about that statement that Mellon made, and talked a little bit about the Kingman crash. It was quite interesting. But I really wanted to know what you think about all this. And before you start, I just want listeners to know that you have a YouTube channel, and I'm going to link to that below. And I would definitely encourage people to check out Michael Schratt's YouTube channel. I don't think there's anyone currently doing active research in this field who really has dove into a lot of these crash retrievals in the way that Michael has. And the Kingman crash, I think in particular, Michael, you and I have talked about this on a number of occasions.
Right.
And there was the late Harry Drew, who really dove into this. You could probably talk about him. But, I mean, he's not here anymore. And I really look to you as probably the most knowledgeable person on this crash retrieval, at least in the public realm, Maybe there's someone in the classified world who knows this better, for all we know. But you've gone pretty deep. So anyway, welcome. It's really nice to have you here. What are your thoughts on all of this?
It's always good to be with you, Richard. I really thank you. I appreciate it. And you're right, Richard. It's important at this point that we identify the legacy crash retrieval witnesses, because they're passing away. We're beyond racing the Undertaker. It is the final curtain call on disclosure regarding these crash retrieval operations, because if we fail to track down the legacy witnesses, then we can't get to their supervisors, and their supervisors can't get us to the areas that have the debris, the bodies, and the craft. And that's why it's imperative that we do this.
Yeah, you're speaking from, I think, the right perspective, which is the public perspective. I mean, I think we can assume within the classified world, black budget world, they may have some information about this that we lack. But I think from an investigative point of view, you're exactly right. This is an urgent matter.
Definitely. And the Stringfield witnesses, taken as a united coalition of firsthand military sources, I do not think they can be denied. These people are not lying to us. They're just telling us what they experienced.
Oh, gosh, totally agree. I haven't talked about Stringfield in detail on this channel in a little while. I mean, he's one of my favorite researchers to discuss, but would you mind just quickly telling people why Stringfield's research in this was so important, and particularly those witnesses, how he came to them and what they had to say to him?
Sure. Leonard Stringfield gave a lecture at the International MUFON Symposium in Dayton, Ohio, right down the road from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where a lot of this went down. And it was titled Retrievals of the Third Kind. And he basically presented a paper that had 12 witness testimonies. And it was about crash retrievals, how many bodies were recovered, where they were sent, how they were retrieved, 18-wheeler, tractor trailer, lowboy shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base under tarp at night, these kind of firsthand military witnesses. But the agreement that Leonard had with his sources is that he could maintain an important part of our national history by telling the account, but their names had to remain under wraps. And so there was this double-edged sword at the MUFON Symposium. I mean, this is revolutionary information back in '78, and he coined the term UFO crash retrieval, so he gets credit for that. But again, there was pushback. There were people that were heckling him there at the MUFON Symposium because he could not produce the names. And so there was this big pushback. But bottom line, and you're the one who highlighted his publication that has all the status reports. When you take that body of evidence as a complete whole, those people are not lying to us. Maybe you might have one or two that are not telling the truth, but taken as a general whole, that's why Leonard's information is so important.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And anyone who's interested in this, I have plugged his book many, many times.
Yes,
It's true.
yeah.
But rightly so, because and it's called
UFO crash retrievals, the complete investigations. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a big 8.5 by 11-inch, I think roughly 400 pages. It's incredibly detailed. And when you go through that, and the thing that's great about Stringfield is he gives you a very meticulous retelling of what his witnesses had to say to him, but he also goes into some pretty good detail about just how he got in touch with these people.
Exactly.
You really get to see his whole pattern. Many of these cases, like these witnesses, like they clearly were not looking for him. He found them in many cases and had really difficulty in nailing some of their statements down and in doing follow-up because they put something out there, but they weren't willing to talk, or he would hear something from someone's wife. The wife would tell him, this is what my husband had to say. And he would sometimes get to that husband, but he really would have to really work hard for a lot of these leads.
Yeah, that's right. And what's interesting, Richard, is when you look at those cases together, you can see a common denominator that goes through a lot of them. For example, in 1963, he talks about a Marine who was involved in guarding a dish-shaped craft at an undisclosed location. This is December 1963. Now, this guard, when he's watching all this go down, he sees these white lab coat technicians try to pierce the skin of the craft with a diamond tip drill bit. In the same book, there's a case in the early 1950s where something came down near Farmington, and he also states that they were using diamond tip drill bits to get in that one too. So when you start looking at this and these things start falling into place, now we see this tapestry, this 400-piece puzzle coming into view now.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Really good points. So do you have anything, and the Kingman crash retrieval very well. Is it a crash retrieval, or is it just a landed recovered craft? I really wonder about that sometimes.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Richard. So I want to get into that. Should I share my screen here?
Please, yeah. You've got
Okay,
some good visuals. I think
let's hope this works here. Let's go here. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Are you seeing this, Richard?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So let's move this over here. That looks good. Okay. So bottom line is, now this is got to give credit where credit is due. Harry Drew is the principal investigator. And as you mentioned, he's no longer with us, but basically he said that the Kingman UFO crash retrieval was in point of fact not a crash. It was a forced landing. When this thing came down at about a 30-degree angle, it buried itself about 20 inches into the soil, but was in perfect working order. So this was actually a forced landing and not a crash retrieval. And I want to go in how this happened, how it was actually
yes,
a forced landing here. Let's see if I can move on to the next slide. So when we talk about Kingman Army Airfield, this whole place closed down November of 1945 and later became a repository for surplus World War II aircraft. Bottom line is you could buy a P-51 Mustang for $3,500, Richard.
wow.
A P-51 for $3,500. I mean, we're talking about 1.2, 1.8 now, might be 2 million. If we had the forethought to go back in time and invest in these surplus war, we'd all be drinking those tropical drinks,
Well, yeah, I mean, that's 1950s dollars though. So, but still, I'm guessing it's a lot cheaper than it would be today, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure. So bottom line is, if this whole place closed down November 1945, then how does the Kingman retrieval operation play into the story here? And that's why we have to go to this aircraft, which is a unsuspecting aircraft in this whole story, but it plays a major role because this is the Russian Tu-95 Bear strategic bomber, first flight November 12th, 1952. And that's the date that's important, 1952. What they were trying to do, the Air Force were trying to do, they were trying to extend their radar range beyond 125 miles so that they could track these strategic bombers doing a bombing run on the continental United States. And so what they were trying to do is experiment with high-powered radars so that they could perfect this technology. And it all stems from this aircraft. They were trying to track this aircraft. And so according to Harry Drew, what they set up doing here is they had a triangular high-powered radar range. One was at a place in Kingman, and then there was another location about 8 miles to the east of Kingman, and then up at Red Lake, and this formed a triangular range. Now, the craft came in from the north, went through the range, was disabled, and then X marks the spot. In this case, a star marks the spot. Approximately 10 miles southeast of Kingman is where this thing came down. Now, this is according to Harry Drew. This is kind of the layout here. I'm going to go to the next slide here, and this is our article here. 30 feet in diameter, as you kind of mentioned before, 14 feet high. It had a small hatchway on the lower dome. There was what looked like ridges wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself, almost looked like slots. And I've got a couple of bullet items up on the top here. This is May 18th, 1953, forced landing. Surface was kind of a brushed aluminum exterior, buried 20 inches into the sand. According to Harry Drew, 4 humanoid-looking beings were recovered. They were taken alive by the military. Primary eyewitness is Arthur G. Stanzel, who I want to talk about a little bit later here. 40 engineers left Phoenix and went up to the site, which I'm going to get into. And then this kind of forms the basis of the Area 51 story, which is hotly contested in this entire case. And let's move on a little bit here. Now, this is the map of where the 25 engineers and scientists departed from Indian Springs by plane. They landed in Phoenix. They were joined by 15 additional engineers and scientists. And then they took a long dirt road up to Kingman. They got there very late at night. So we've got 40 engineers and scientists that arrive at the scene, and this is the overall map. I'm going to go to the next slide.
They went to Phoenix first, though.
They went to Phoenix first to pick up the other 15, and then they headed north toward Kingman.
Gotcha.
They got there in a General Motors Model 3301 bus that had blacked out windows, and that's how they got there. This is all according to Harry Drew. I mean, he's nailed it down to the actual model of the bus, and he knows the bus driver too. Long since gone now, but he's done a tremendous amount of research. So we've got 40 people on the bus, and I'm going to go to the next slide here. And when they get there, this is what they see. There's about 50 personnel, MPs, surrounding the craft itself. You see the bus in the background. They had 2 high-intensity LiDAR devices, one on the right, one on the left. They had 1 tent set up at 4 corners of the retrieval operation. And yet, as you can see, this thing came down at about a 20-degree angle, buried itself about 20 inches into the soil, and then there's this opening in the lower section of the rim. Now, we've got some interesting statements by Harry Drew indicating that there were multiple medical personnel that tried to enter this craft, and within a matter of minutes, they were disoriented, they got sick. It was very difficult for anybody to stay in any length of time within this craft. And this is somewhat confirmed by an interesting engineer that we'll talk about a little bit later here. So this is basically the outline at the site. Now, a couple of bullet items. When we got to the site, the bus parked approximately 50 feet from the object. Number 2, upon arrival, team members were told that they were here to examine a super secret Air Force vehicle that had come down. That's what they were told. Now, another point that Harry talked about is when these engineers and scientists, when they left the bus, it wasn't a haphazard departure. It wasn't like all 40 people departed the bus. They departed according to their area of expertise. So you had metallurgical scientists, you had people who were experts in archaeology, you had atomic bomb scientists. They all left according to their expertise. 20 to 50 military personnel. We've got the high intensity lights, and then we talked about the hatch, which is about 3.5 feet high and about 1.5 feet wide. That's the dimension for that hatch. Now, once they got to the site, they had to get this thing out of here. So an M25 tank transporter was brought in. and they built a cradle device out of beams. And there was some residual force going on within the interior of the craft. So it was tilted just at a slight angle. And this is how they moved it from the touchdown site near Kingman, southeast of Kingman, on its way across the Colorado River. And I want to
You'd
give
need a
credit
pretty
to
decent,
Nichols.
you'd need a decent crane, I would think, to get it on there. That looks pretty precarious. I'm guessing
Yeah,
the driver went very slowly.
very, very slowly. That's correct. Very slowly.
Do you know if they threw a tarp over that? I mean, you would think that's a normal thing. You'd have to throw something over that.
Maybe later they did. I don't have any information on that. Harry
Okay.
didn't tell me too much about
Mhm.
what they, and this is all at night, and this is a in haste operation because they had to get this thing out of the area quickly, according to Harry. So the next thing is they've got to get this thing across the Colorado River to get to a certain base. And they're stringing cables across the Colorado River. They're trying to get this thing across the passway on the Hoover Dam roadway, but the lighting fixtures are too close in because this thing is, the diameter is exceeding the road width. So they actually go into a put-in about 100 feet north of the north wall of the Hoover Dam. They float a barge down the Colorado River, and they roll the M25 tank transporter with the dish-shaped craft up on the top of it onto this barge, and they're moving this thing across the Colorado River. This is at night, and all of a sudden, according to Harry Drew, the cable snapped, and this barge is now going down the Colorado River, and it actually makes contact with the north wall of the Hoover Dam. So I'm thinking, Richard,
Mhm.
being that a little while ago, the lake level of Mead was down lower, we might be able to see an impact mark where this thing made impact with the north wall of the Hoover Dam. Now, again, according to Harry Drew, there was screaming, there was yelling, it was a disarray type situation. They eventually brought another two cables across. They were able to get it to the other side. And here's a little bit more of a blow up of the scene here. I'm going to go to one more forward here. And now you can kind of see this as it may have happened back in 1953.
Should we point out the artwork you're showing, which is, of
Yeah.
course, extremely beautiful. This is artwork. I just want to
Yes.
emphasize. And you have worked in the past with some really remarkable artists, and these are by
Tom Bogan gets credit for the
Tom
artwork.
Bogan. Yeah.
Tom Bogan gets credit for the artwork. Now, Harry Drew's no longer with us, but fortunately, he did write a book that describes all of this in detail. 7 Days in May, the Kingman UFO story. It's got pictures, it's got drawings, it's got illustrations. He takes you through the process of how he got this information. And what I like about Harry is he was a true researcher. He didn't just go on someone's word. He actually requested the microfilm reels, got that to his location, and they trusted him with the microfiche and microfilm to make copies, and he sent it back to the reference libraries. That's the measure of a true researcher.
Yeah.
Now, that brings us to Bill Uhouse, who
Mhm.
claims that he worked on flying saucer simulators at Remote Test Site Detachment 3. And the primary feature on this entire operation here with the simulator is a 36-inch diameter gimbal ball, which you see on the upper top view. That allows kind of a 360-degree rotation. And he mentioned that he was involved in doing the detailed interior of the instrument panel on these craft. But he also mentioned that people who were associated with the simulator, when they got inside the craft, they got sick as well. And that tracks with what Harry Drew had talked about through his witnesses. So we have a little bit of an independent confirmation here. Now I want to move on to the next slide that gives you kind of a SolidWorks rendering of what this gimbal device looks like. So really, in your assessment, Richard, have you heard of anything else to confirm Bill Uhouse's account of these simulators?
No, I mean, many people, myself, are very familiar with what Uhouse had said about this,
Right.
that it was used for flight simulation. But to be honest with you, I've not heard of any other corroboration, and I didn't really know how the simulation physically would have taken place. So this is very interesting to me that you're giving a really interesting, a good visual to demonstrate just how this might have happened.
Yeah, the key device would be this 36-inch diameter gimbal device. So Author and researcher Harry Drew stated that the primary source for detailed information on the Kingman case was an atomic bomb scientist named Arthur G. Stanzel. So it really hinges on this guy. He was 28 years old when this all went down, and he was involved in Operation Upshot Knothole, March 17th, 1953 to June 4th, 1953. That's within the Kingman event. Those timelines and dates actually check out. So what I started doing is I didn't leave it here. I started digging and trying to figure out, can we verify that this gentleman is in point of fact is who he said he is here? So I pulled up his obituary. Arthur G. Stanzel, 82, December 3rd, 2006, in New Hampshire, former engineer with GTE Sylvania Apollo program in Needham. So this is 1924 to 2006. So that checks out with what Harry Drew had talked about. So then I went into legacy.com and I pulled up this information, and we'll kind of rip through this quickly here. For 12 years, he worked as a civilian with the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson Field, where he worked on many historical programs, including certain aspects of the famous Manhattan Project.
Yeah, there we go.
His assignments was a study of the effects of atomic blast on structures. In this assignment, he witnessed 3 experimental atomic blasts at close range. He served as a project engineer for GAM-72 guided missile development. For 2 years, he worked on activation mechanisms for the Curtiss-Wright Corporation in Caldwell, New Jersey. He subsequently worked for several engineering companies in New York City and New Jersey. And just
he was the real deal.
Yeah, a particularly interesting and adventurous program to which Arthur contributed was the study of aircraft landing systems. This task took him to Greenland and the South Pole. He came to New England in the 1960s as an employee of Raytheon Corporation in Bedford, Massachusetts. His interesting and varied career in science and engineering continued, and the next 12 years were spent as a principal engineer of Raytheon's Apollo space program and 15 years as program manager for GTE Systems Sylvania Apollo software support. This checks out with what the other obituary said. So then I dug a little bit further here and I came up with this article. Dayton Daily News, April 5th, 1957, 111,000-pound plane skis to world mark. And then it talks about here C-123, and you can see the engineers basically installing these skis on the C-123. Okay, so what I want to highlight here, and again, the reference is Dayton Daily News, April 5th, 1957. And this is one of these confirming little aspects here that plays a bigger picture here. It says both are with the WADC, Wright Air Development Center, Directorate of Flight and All-Weather Testing. Task Force Coordinator is Arthur G. Stanzel. So this is our man. This confirms that he was connected to Wright Field, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and this is what tracks with the obituary. Now I want to go a little bit further here, and this is a letter to Jalen Hynek from Raymond Fowler, May 19th, 1973. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but if you look at the bullet items here and the dating of this gentleman's biography, June 1949 to November 1953, Air Material Command Installations Division, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Supervisor Eric Wang. And I know, Richard, you're familiar with him.
Yes, Eric Wang is one of these people. Remember the late Bill Steinman, a UFO researcher back in the day who looked into the Aztec crafts.
Right.
I know he was deep into hunting this man's identity down, but you probably know more about Eric Wang than I do. He was a very, very important scientist who had important information, operational information about this whole program, I believe.
Yeah, there's also references to him within the Stringfield collection too. And I wanted to highlight just this bottom paragraph here. It says, during this period, the witness was involved in R&D techniques for determining blast effects on buildings and structures. He also was on special assignment as a project engineer for the Air Force Buildings and Structures portion of Operation Upshot Knothole, held at the Atomic Proving Ground, Nevada. His supervisor there was Dr. Edward Dahl. It was Dahl that informed him of the special assignment, which turned out to be the investigation of a crash UFO. So there's a name.
Did you say Dahl, or I thought there's an Eric Wang, and did I just mishear you?
No, we have Eric Wang, and then below that we have Ed or Edward
Okay,
Dahl.
great.
Yep. So, there's people that we can follow up on here, and the paper trail kind of continues. But again, I just wanted to confirm that this actually tracks with the obituary. We do have our man here. So.
Oh, yes. And I mean, he is the real deal. Arthur Stansel clearly was truthful about his background, and was in the right place at the right time, it seems like.
That's right. That's what it looks like when you take it all together.
Yeah.
And we've got independent confirmation from other sources talking about seeing photographs that were brought home to show people, and then later they were fired because that photograph was missing and it was in a Southwest location, which may or may not be Kingman, Arizona. But so we have a little bit of kind of tangential information that seems to confirm it as well.
Now, is this your last slide that you wanted to share?
That's the last slide I wanted to share, yes.
We want to take that off, or shall I
Yep,
take
we
it
can
off?
take that off.
Uh,
Let's see here, I can stop share. Okay.
There
so
we
now
go.
we're back here. Yep.
Michael, that's really interesting. And, I'm glad that you came on for this segment, because it really, this is a validation of 50 plus years of UFO research. You mentioned Stringfield's first presentation on this in 1978, where he was at times shouted down.
Right.
There's been so much ridicule associated with crash retrieval research for so many years. Only recently has our culture started to come around and think, oh, yeah, maybe there are these UFO crash retrievals. But the idea was so outrageous for so long. But again, back to Chris Mellon's statement just from yesterday, I think, we're looking at potentially a significant corroboration and maybe confirmation of a lot of these types of claims. Definitely the Kingman one, that's important. And that made me think of you immediately. So I'm so grateful that you came on. I want people, once again, to know about your channel. It's Michael Schratt on YouTube. I will link below. You do fairly regular uploads these days.
Correct.
And it's all like, this is what you do.
Yes, it's true.
Great visuals. You are a wealth of you do your own work with SolidWorks. Is that what you're?
SolidWorks, AutoCAD,
Yeah.
but I can only take these cases so far, Richard. I have to commission professional artists to do these biomorphic aircraft designs, something that has smooth, continuous curvature. That requires a professional to do this. And I want to make these cases come alive. I really do.
You succeed, and I have no doubt people are very grateful to see this. We've done programs on my on channel before, and you've generously showed a lot of those images. It's really great that you can do that again. But I just want people to know you do this all the time on your channel.
Correct.
Do check out Michael. This is a direct plug. Yes, it's a plug for Michael Schratt's channel. I do want interested people to check it out. So I hope you get some traffic there.
Great.
You deserve it. There aren't that many researchers who are really focusing on the history of the UFO subject during the 20th and 21st centuries, particularly the 20th. And you're one of the few who are really diving in consistently. You've never let up, and you are a wealth of information on it. So I'm really, really glad and grateful that you're able to be here.
I believe that the crash retrievals are going to be the linchpin to all of this. They are the Rosetta Stone to this whole thing, because that will lead us to the bodies, the debris, and the craft. Anything short of that physical evidence, we're going to be here another 80 years. We can't afford to let that kind of time go by. That's why it's imperative, and it's the final curtain call. We've got to make a move.
Yeah. Yes, agreed. Well, I don't know if I have anything else to add. I'm really glad that you were able to do this with us, Michael, and I wish you well. We'll be in touch. We always are, and I think I'm going to see you in about a month or so.
Yes, that's true.
At the Contact in the Desert, excuse me, in near Palm Springs, Indian Wells, California. So
Correct.
A lot of fun. Okay, well, that'll be it for here. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us. A really interesting news day, and one that has a lot more historical research to support it than sometimes people might realize. And that is why we had Michael Schratt on here to help provide that support. So again, very glad for that. Everyone have a very great day. I will be back soon. Oh, if you like what I do, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and all of that. That was my my forgetful nature. And again, thank you for everyone who is here with us for this special presentation. Okay, let's keep fighting the good fight. Later.